Alright, so in this lesson I'm going to go over how to multiply and divide fractions. So this first example says multiply 3/7 times 5/6. And I'm going to show you two methods for doing this. Alright, so here's the first method. Now when you multiply fractions, it's much easier than adding and subtracting fractions because you don't need a common denominator. So when we multiply fractions, all we're going to do is multiply the two top numbers, the numerators, together, and we're going to multiply the denominators together. So all I'm going to do is take 3 times 5, that's 15, and then 7 times 6 is 42. And like always, whenever you're working with fractions, you always need to check to make sure that your answer can't be simplified. And in this case, they can. There's a common factor between 15 and 42 of 3. So that means I can divide each of these by 3 to simplify this fraction. So I divide by 3. I get 15 divided by 3 is 5. And 42 divided by 3 is 14. So the answer is 5/14. So again, all you got to do is multiply straight across, then make sure that you simplify your answer. All right, so method 2. Now you can only do what I'm about to show you when you're multiplying fractions. You can't do this when you're adding or subtracting fractions, and you can't do it when you're dividing fractions. It can only be done when multiplying. And so what we're going to do is simplify the diagonal numbers that have a common factor. So we have one diagonal that has a 3 and a 6, and we have another diagonal with 5 and 7. Well, 5 and 7, their only common factor is 1, so we can't simplify that. But 3 and 6 have a common factor of 3, so what we're going to do is divide each of these by 3. So 3 divided by 3 would become 1, and 6 divided by 3 would become 2. So in other words, 3 over 6 is the same thing as 1 over 2. And again, now I'm going to do what I did on the last one, and I'm going to multiply straight across. So when I do that, I have 1 times 5 is 5, and 7 times 2 is 14. And you'll see we got the same answer. So the difference between these two methods is in the first method, I'm simplifying at the end. In the second method, I'm simplifying in the beginning. And you'll see with method 2, it's actually easier because here I'm simplifying 3 and 6. Whereas up here, I had to simplify 15 and 42. So method 2 is the preferred method. If you simplify the diagonals fully, then your answer will always be simplified. All right, so let's look at another one. So multiplying with mixed numbers. Now, notice in the last example, I used an X to mean multiplication. In this example, I'm using a dot. So there are 3 ways to show multiplication: the X, the dot, and the other way is to just put parentheses around these. In algebra, you won't see the X used very often because X represents a variable in algebra. So what you're normally going to see is just parentheses. All right, so the first thing you need to do here is change these into improper fractions. Change to improper fractions. So we have mixed numbers. You can't multiply mixed numbers together. So you can't do like 2 times 1 is 2, 4 times 2 is 8, and 5 times 3 is 15. It doesn't work that way. So we have to change these into improper fractions. The way that you do that is you multiply these two numbers together. So do 5 times 2, and then you add the number that's on the numerator. So 5 times 2 is 10, plus 4 is 14. And the denominator stays the same. So again, I did 5 times 2 is 10, plus 4 is 14. And that's a terrible 5. I'm going to rewrite that. And then we're going to do the same thing for this fraction. So I'm going to multiply 3 times 1, and then add 2. So 3 times 1 is 3, plus 2 is 5. So that comes out to 5/3. So instead of multiplying 2 and 4/5 times 1 and 2/3, we're going to multiply 14/5 by 5/3. These fractions are equivalent to this. They're just written in improper form. And improper form means that the numerator is greater than the denominator. All right, so thinking back to method 2 from the last slide, check your diagonals to see if there's any common factors. 3 and 14 only have a common factor of 1, so that doesn't help me. But 5 and 5 have a common factor of 5. So I can divide each of these by 5. That becomes 1. That becomes 1. And now I multiply straight across. 14 times 1 is 14. 1 times 3 is 3. And this is an improper fraction. And so you should never leave a fraction as improper. Well, I take that back. In algebra, we actually do normally leave these as improper. But just to go over how to change this back into a mixed number, what you do is you see how many times, I'm going to put this out on the side over here, you see how many times will 3, the denominator, go into the numerator. And so 3 goes into 14 4 times. 3 times 4 is 12. So it goes in 4 times, and then there's a remainder of 2. So the way we would write this as a mixed number is you would say 4 and 2/3. So this number goes here, and the remainder goes here, and the denominator stays the same. All right, so let's look at division. So dividing fractions is kind of an interesting thing. The way that we divide fractions by actually changing it into multiplication. So we have 4/5 divided by 3/7. And the way that I teach this is a method called keep, change, flip. So what you do is you keep the first fraction, the 4/5. You change the division to multiplication. That's the C for change. So I keep it, I change it, and then this one I flip. So I flip this over and make it 7/3. That's called the reciprocal. So when you flip a fraction over, that's called its reciprocal. And now I just do this the same way that I did the last ones. So now I just multiply straight across. Again, check the diagonals. There's no common factors here. So I multiply straight across, and I get 28. I don't know, 12. I said 20. 28 over 15. And again, if you were to write that as a mixed number, 15 will go into 28 one time with a remainder of 13 and keep the denominator. So 15 goes into 28 once with a remainder of 13. All right, so mixed numbers. Just like with multiplying, we need to change these into improper. So again, what I'm going to do is multiply these together and then add the top number. 3 times 4 is 12, plus 2 is 14, so that's 14/3, divided by 7 times 5 is 35, plus 3 is 38. Keep the denominator. Check my diagonals here. Doesn't look like I have any common factors, unfortunately. So now I'm going to do keep, change, flip. Keep the 14/3. I change the division to multiplication, and I flip this fraction over, taking its reciprocal. And actually, I messed up before. I told you to check the diagonals here to see if they could be simplified. You can't check the diagonals on division. You can't do that. You have to change it into multiplication. Now I can check the diagonals. So that was my fault. Sorry. So now I do have common factor here between 14 and 38. They're both even numbers, and even numbers always have a common factor of 2. So I'm going to divide both of these by 2. I'm going to get 7 and 19. So now when I multiply straight across, 7 times 5 is 35. And I have 3 times 19, which is 57. So that would be my answer. All right, so hopefully that was helpful to you. If so, give it a like and a subscribe, and feel free to leave me a comment. Until next time.